In 2013, the British National Army Museum conducted a poll to determine Britain's greatest battle. The outcome may have come as a surprise for many. While the likes of Waterloo and D-Day often take the centre stage in the mind of many, the winner of the poll, the often overlooked but crucial battles at Imphal and Kohima during the Burma Campaign. Fought by the men of the 14th Army, self-nicknamed the Forgotten Army, these battles were the turning point of one of the most brutal campaigns of the Second World War, and helped turn the tide for the reconquest of Burma and the defeat of the Japanese army there. I will be breaking the battle into two separate parts. Today, I will be tackling Imphal, and next time, Kohima. In the weeks following their attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese launched invasions against European colonies all over the Far East. The British territories of Malaya, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Burma all fell to the rampant Japanese. With the fall of Burma in 1942, British interests in India were now under a very real threat. But, after a period of reconstruction, the British had managed to salvage the situation, under the guidance of General Bill Slim, the commander of the newly formed 14th Army. He began planning not only to stop the Japanese, but to defeat them, stopping them from attacking India and retaking Burma in the process. Slim knew that change was needed for his newly formed army. He supported increased offensive patrolling and extensive night training to encourage his soldiers to lose their fear of the jungle and the belief that the Japanese soldiers were better jungle fighters. He encouraged his men to see the jungle and the bad weather as an ally, something that would aid them rather than hinder them. He trained his units to form defensive boxes that would be resupplied by air and assisted by integrated close air support, artillery, and armour. Slim encouraged his men to hold their positions if their flanks were overrun, a far cry from their previous encounters with the Japanese, when Allied troops cut and run when outflanked. Due to Burma's poor and unreliable infrastructure, the use of motor vehicles was to be limited, with more emphasis put onto mules and horses, and crucially air transport. The resupply by air would take on a key role of supplying the men inside the defensive boxes. The training and reorganization would show its effectiveness during two crucial battles in mid-1944. The town of Imphal is located in northeast India in the state of Manipur. It was a prize asset for both sides, as its flat geography lent itself perfectly for airfields. If the Japanese could capture Imphal, they would cut the road linking Dimapur, Imphal, and neighbouring Kohima, disrupting British plans to retake Burma, as well as cutting off supplies to neighbouring allies in China. Slim knew that the Japanese were planning an offensive, and rather than attack, he pulled his forces back to Imphal and Kohima, and planned to fight a defensive battle on his terms. Knowing the Japanese had trouble supplying their men, he shortened his own supply lines, and forced the Japanese to overextend theirs to the point of breaking. The Japanese force of over 85,000 men crossed the Chinwin River on the 8th of March 1944, and they began pouring into India, heading for Imphal. Imphal was defended by British 4th Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Geoffrey Scoones. They were made up of British, Gurkha, and Indian troops. At the beginning of the offensive, the British units were spread out in the field. However, the Japanese were unable to destroy them in battle, and the units were able to retreat and form a defensive box around Imphal. To the north of Imphal, the 50th Indian Parachute Brigade occupied a key hill on the road to nearby Kohima. The Japanese had to take the hill to continue the operation, and after 6 days of hard fighting, the paratroopers finally withdrew to a lack of supplies. It was a crucial moment, however. The Japanese soldiers were already running low on supplies, and this 6-day delay cost them dearly, as it allowed the British to reinforce their defensive positions at both Imphal and Kohima. The Japanese did manage to surround both Imphal and Kohima, but, just as Bill Slim had trained them, they held firm and received crucial supply by air. The RAF dropped thousands of tons of supplies, brought in reinforcements, evacuated the wounded, and provided close air support to the troops on the ground. The fighting around Imphal was savage. Close quarters fighting meant that men often fought hand to hand, bayonet to bayonet, and every time it seemed the Japanese might break through the line, fresh British reinforcements arrived to bolster their positions, and they held firm against every attack the Japanese threw at them. Every day the British held weakened the Japanese, whose men were running low on food and water. By grinding down the Japanese, the British were able to launch counterattacks on the surrounding hills, eventually repelling the Japanese off them. By July, the Japanese troops at Imphal were at breaking point. A major lack of food supplies, ammunition, and reinforcements forced their hand. Part of their plan had relied on using captured supplies, When these were not forthcoming, due to the British destroying anything that could have been captured, the Japanese troops literally began to starve to death. By the time the Japanese began to pull back, the situation for their men was dire, and thousands died or were simply left behind on the slow march back to their own lines. The British held firm, repulsing everything the Japanese could throw at them. Slim's defensive box tactics had worked perfectly, and his men gained renewed confidence. The defence at Imphal was a success. The Japanese casualties in the attack on India was catastrophic. Of the roughly 85,000 men who took part in the operation, around 55,000 became casualties from battle, starvation and disease. Crucially for the Japanese, they lost thousands of mules, horses and artillery pieces, which would have dire consequences for the remainder of the war in Burma. The British lost 12,000 at Imphal and a further 5,000 at Kohima. The British army the Japanese faced in 1944 was significantly different to the one they had swept aside in 41 and 42. They were better trained, equipped, and had high morale. They had air superiority, which crucially allowed them to reinforce their new defensive box tactic. With victory at Imphal and Kohima, the supply lines to China remained open. The British retained their airfields, and the Japanese lost the initiative in Burma. The British gained more confidence, allowing them to gather their forces to reinvade the country. The two battles were crucial, and definitely a turning point of the war in the Far East. The British had won a decisive, clear victory, and it was one the Japanese could not recover from. Sadly, in the eyes of the British public, the heroics and brilliance of the men at Imphal and Kohima were overshadowed by events in France in June and July of 1944. Next time I shall be discussing the Battle of Kohima, so stay tuned. Don't forget to like and subscribe and turn the notification bell on to be reminded when the next part is out. Thank you all for watching and supporting the channel. See you on the next one. Goodbye.